Russia's strategic aims extend now beyond the territory in the Donbass region. And I suspect that Vladimir Putin's own aspirations remain the occupation of the entirety of Ukraine, and basically to treat Ukraine broadly in the same way that Adolf Hitler planned to do.
The head of the CIA has said this week that Russia's experience in Ukraine is affecting China's calculations on how and when it may decide to invade Taiwan. Well, Nigel Inkster is the former Director of Operations and Intelligence at MI6 and is now Director of Transnational Threats and Political Risk at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Good afternoon to you, Nigel.
Good afternoon.
Really good to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us. We were talking a little earlier on the programme to one of Ukraine's ministers saying that they're still planning to press ahead with preparations to release these millions of tons of grain that have been blockaded in Ukraine's southern ports. But of course, that missile strike on Odessa really increases the questions about whether Russia will stick to its side of the bargain. Why do you think President Putin has agreed to this deal to release the grain?
Well, I'm no expert on Ukraine or Russia, but it seems to me pretty clear that Vladimir Putin is concerned not to unnecessarily antagonize important countries in the Middle East and Africa that see the supply of Ukrainian grain as vital. He doesn't want to be cast as a villain in terms of starving or putting at risk large populations in the developing world. So I think it really boils down to that.
And what do you think about the way the Ukraine war is progressing? I know, as you say, you're not an expert on Ukraine itself, but you know a lot about the way that Russia operates, about the way the Russian secret intelligence forces operate. There was a lot of criticism. Certainly, Putin has booted out several senior figures in the intelligence services in Russia. Do you get the sense, because it's so difficult to read what's going on in Russia, that there is much real discontent within Russia at the way President Putin is pressing ahead with this Ukraine, with the huge cost in terms of loss of life of Russian citizens as well as Ukrainians, and of course the international isolation?
Yeah, I mean, there clearly is dissatisfaction within Russia, and we're hearing reports which seem credible of increasing numbers of people deserting from the military. But I don't think that's really significant. I still believe that Vladimir Putin enjoys majority support within Russia for this invasion. The message that it's everyone else's fault against, apart from Russia, resonates with a significant part of the Russian population. And although it is clear that the first phase of the invasion was an intelligence disaster and a military fiasco, I've always thought that the real test would be the second phase, the one that we're in now in the Donbass and in Luhansk. And there, I think Russian strengths are starting to show in terms of their capacity to deliver large quantities of indiscriminate force.
And now that we've seen this deal, admittedly, there was no direct signature between Ukraine and Russia, but we have seen President Putin agree to this limited deal to lift the blockade on the southern ports. Do you think that could indicate that he will reach a stage where he feels he's taken enough of that eastern and southern territory in Ukraine to say, OK, I'm ready to negotiate now? Do you think that scenario could be about to unfold?
I don't think it's going to unfold imminently. There may well come a point at which Vladimir Putin decides that it's safe for him to call a halt and declare victory of a kind. But I think Foreign Minister Lavrov the other day has made it clear that Russia's strategic aims extend now beyond the territory in the Donbass region. And I suspect that Vladimir Putin's own aspirations remain the occupation of the entirety of Ukraine, and basically to treat Ukraine broadly in the same way that Adolf Hitler planned to do.
We've seen President Putin also forging new international alliances. There was the meeting with President Xi of China. We saw him more recently heading to Iran. Do you think there is a danger of a new anti-Western alliance emerging?
I'm not sure that it's going to be an alliance. I mean, if we look at the relationship between Russia and China, that is not an alliance. And despite the fact that Putin and Xi announced that it was a partnership without limits in the immediate run-up to the Ukraine invasion, the reality is that China has been fairly cautious in its response. I mean, purporting to be neutral. It has publicly supported the Russian line. It has publicly replayed Russian disinformation. But at the same time, China has been very, very careful not to do anything that would make it vulnerable to Western sanctions. And I think that probably President Xi is quite discountenanced by the evidence of military incompetence and the fact that this whole exercise has dragged on as long as it has. So I don't think that China will abandon Russia. I don't think it can. It will stick with it. But are these relationships and a fortiori with Iran capable of being characterized as alliances? I don't think so.
Yeah, because we had, I was interested in what you were saying about the way that the Chinese are looking at the war in Ukraine. We had this warning this week from the CIA director, William Burns, saying that China was unsettled when it looked at the war in Ukraine, and saying that China viewed it as a strategic failure for Putin, and that could affect China's approach to Taiwan. I mean, what did you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think it would be very bold of me to go against the director of the CIA, who's got far more detailed information than I'm ever going to have access to. But I think that's broadly right. I mean, I think when it comes to Taiwan, China looks at this very differently. And I found it very interesting to note that Chinese civilian and military officials have reacted very strongly with indignation verging on outrage to the suggestion that there's any similarity between Ukraine and Taiwan. My own sense is that the Chinese have a game plan for Taiwan. They're playing it long. Their aim is through a combination of carrot and stick to persuade the Taiwanese that resistance is useful, reunification with China is the only option. And they hope to be able to do this without actually having to resort to warfare. That said, they have been working hard over many years to develop the capabilities they would need if they had to resort to conflict. And I think the key question we need to ask ourselves now in relation to Taiwan is, at what point might the Chinese leadership decide that peaceful reunification is, in the face of what they perceive as continued American kind of microaggressions, no longer a realistic option?
We are looking at the Conservative leadership contest, and whoever does take over as Prime Minister will face these huge security threats from Russia, very obviously, the commitment to continue to support Ukraine, concerns about what China might do. The defence budget, I know it's not something you're directly concerned with because you're more focused on the intelligence, but if intelligence, defence, do we need to further increase our budgets? Liz Truss is talking about increasing the defence budget to 3% by 2030. Do you think we do need to start thinking rather more long term and try to change our whole approach to all of this and increase defence spending as a result of the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think that the case for increased defence spending is, being made before our eyes, and with that comes, I would argue, a case for a significant increase in intelligence expenditure. I mean, the UK benefits hugely from being a member of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance, and that actually kind of defrays, some of the costs we might otherwise have to absorb ourselves. But I think the way the world is turning, we probably are going to have to invest yet more in intelligence than we've done thus far. But at the same time, I think that the way the world is evolving does call for a certain sense of realism, and I sometimes worry that a kind of jingoistic rule Britannia approach is increasingly unsustainable in the world to which we're transitioning.
Are you thinking about Boris Johnson when you talk about this jingoistic rule Britannia approach?
Yeah, I'm not mentioning any names, but I think I think we need to have some sense of realism about our place in the world.
Let me just ask you about one more specific story. That's the Mail on Sunday today is warning that China could attempt to interfere in the Tory leadership election in a similar manner to we heard about the Russian bots meddling in the 2016 Brexit referendum. The paper quotes British security sources fearing that the way that the online voting is working means it would be very vulnerable to cyber hacking, probably by the Chinese. What do you make of that, Nigel?
Well, it is a possibility. And, how imminent and realistic is very difficult for me to judge. I mean, any digital voting system is going to be vulnerable to interference. Though that can be dealt with if sufficient resources and focus are brought to bear. I actually really wonder whether the Chinese would think this was worth bothering with. I don't think they're that concerned about who ends up being prime minister in the UK.